And okay, so again, I would like to introduce Leah Fleming, Director of Student Equity and Title IX, and would ask that, again, you mute yourself as you come in, and we will call on you either through the chat or through raising your hand, but we do want your input as you go through this. So Leah, take it away.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday, happy May Day. Like Stephen said, I'm the Director of Student Equity and Title IX here at Coastline College. And specifically, this presentation came about, yes, from working with our faculty, but also in regards to COVID-19. Last month, our Student Equity Work Group met, and many issues that have come up, or just conversations that have come up with students, is around the idea of compassion during this time and flexibility during this time of COVID. And we know that this is not normal, and that we are all living through this pandemic together. And so oftentimes, sometimes that shifts the work that we're doing. And so we just want to get us recentered, for those of us who may have lost that, so that we can get back to that place of leading with equity and keeping that in the center of our work. So I'm in control here, right? Okay.
Yes,
yep. Okay. All of you saw this. So what we're going to talk about is just key elements of being equity centered during this time, and being compassionate and flexible, and what we can do, and what some strategies that we as a college can impose during this time period. So we're going to ask you to participate via chat. Stephen's going to be monitoring that. If you do have questions, he's going to be monitoring the raise your hand feature as well. So some of the things I want us to be able to take away from our conversation today is, we're going to discuss how to be equity-minded in our practices. I know that we have had trainings and we've done presentations on this throughout the college, but I just want us to have that recentering, especially around COVID-19. We're going to become aware of resources that are available to support students. And then lastly, practical strategies that we can use during this time, based off of some research that we've been doing, as well as other folks who have been doing presentations along this work. During this time, we have watched other webinars and brought some of that in, because we know that not everybody has the time and capacity to go to all of those workshops. So we're going to provide you some practical strategies. And I'm asking for folks who have been doing this work, especially faculty, VPs, that as we go through this, if you have strategies that have worked with students in your time, that you engage in that conversation with us as well. All right, so let's talk about it. What is equity centered? And if you know this, you can throw it in the chat room. But what I have here is, when we talk about being equity centered, we talk about these 5 principles of being evidence-based. So we're using data, we're using the knowledge that we know, and we're being race conscious, we're being institutionally focused, systematically aware, and equity advanced. And so we're going to go through all of those today, and a few others, to make sure that we are in our work equity centered, using these 5 principles. Sorry, the waiting room. Okay, thank you. And so we know that equity-minded, we talk about equity-minded and being equity-centered, we focus on these things: being color conscious, which is race conscious, and it's different from being the idea of being colorblind. We often hear people say, well, I don't see color, I don't see race. And by being colorblind in situations, you are doing a disservice to our students, especially during COVID-19. We know and understand that students of our African-American students, our Hispanic students, our students who are disproportionately impacted on our campus, that their educational outcomes, their services, their needs are different. And so we have to be aware of that. And so we know here, and we get this from Ben Salman, he says, being color conscious means noticing and questioning patterns of educational outcomes that reveal unexplainable differences, specifically around our students of color and our minoritized students. We want to be aware that beliefs and expectations and practices assumed to be neutral can have outcomes that are racially disadvantaged. And so we know that racially disadvantage is creating what is unequal outcomes, and that sometimes comes from students' cultural our practices, and they're based on stereotype assumptions. And so we want to be able to eliminate that. We want to be able to also take away and eliminate the inequities and responsibility. So we often hear in the classroom where the student didn't work hard. That's why they're not passing this test. They've had opportunities to get a loan or computer. Why aren't they not in my classroom? Why aren't they not successful? And we really want to reframe that focus to not be on what the student isn't doing, but taking into mind everything that's happening with COVID-19, taking into account the setting in which the student is living in, taking into account the resources that they do or do not have, and not putting it on the student as to why you are not doing this, but how as an institution, how as a faculty member, how as student services, can we provide strategies, can we provide resources for you to be successful to complete your work?
Leah, if in looking at this, are you able to give us a description or explanation of what it means to be color conscious as opposed to color blind, to make sure that we understand really the importance of that process and what we as faculty and classified professionals can do to make sure that we're following that guideline?
Yes. So when we talk about being color conscious, it means noticing and questioning educational outcomes that reveal unexplainable differences for minority students. So oftentimes when we say, like, people, I've heard this, is I don't see color. You know, I teach all my students the same and I don't see color, and therefore I shouldn't have to adjust my practices. I shouldn't have to add cultural relevant pedagogy to my work. And by doing that, you are doing a disservice to our students, because the idea is that you have to be color conscious and look at the historical background, look at discriminations that have already been put in place in educational systems. Because by you saying, I don't see color, I'm just going to continue to teach. And if I'm a Black student in your classroom, and every example has, you know, folks that don't look like me, everything I read I don't identify with, I'm more likely than not, more likely to not be as successful in that classroom. And so we ask that we look at those things and we say, like, yes, there is historical context, there is discrimination in our educational systems, and we have to be aware of that. We have to acknowledge that for us to move forward. If we choose not to, if we choose to be colorblind, we are going to continue this pattern of our students not receiving the resources, our policies being in place that are not going to be able to assist in us getting to closing those gaps for our students and being successful.
So essentially you're saying that if we're not color conscious, then we're not able to prop up and provide support for those who might need it based on them being disadvantaged. We're just acting as if it doesn't exist, and I'm not biased because I don't see it. But in reality, you might be, because you're not helping prop up those that are disadvantaged and need the support to be successful.
Correct.
Stephen, this is Lori. If I may, I guess the way I understand what Leah is saying too is really acknowledging that there are inequities that exist based on, like Leah said, historical context, but based on race and ethnicity. And so saying that, you know, we treat them all the same and we're colorblind, it's not acknowledging inequity.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Adrian. Okay, Leah.
All right. And so I took this quote here and I'm going to read it, and you obviously can see this yourself here, but I'm going to read it to you because for me, it really hit home, and it wants us to focus within equity and being equity minded. We have to do self-reflection. You have to be aware of your own biases. You have to be able to take that time to look at yourself. And so this quote here says, equity mindedness asks us to turn the mirror on ourselves and accept the fact that we actually play a pretty significant role in creating inequitable outcomes. So there are barriers that are extinct, but for many people, very difficult to identify because they seem so normalized. People continue to work with these practices, never once considering that their seemingly incoherent practices contribute to inequitable outcomes. So back to what Dr. Adrian and Stephen were talking about, if we don't take the time to reflect upon ourselves, if we don't take the time to understand who we are, our own identities, and also take the time to know and understand our students, we keep playing a part in the inequities. And so you have to take those moments. You have to take the time to do that work, especially in higher education, where day in and day out, we are constantly working with students who don't look like us, who have different beliefs than us. And so with that, we have to be more inclusive in our practices and in our work. But I really like this because it makes it that we have to focus on, you have to do work on yourself and accept that you play a big part in the overall system of providing equity for our students.
And Leah, along those lines, for someone that might be of privilege or someone that is taking a look at themselves, how do they not feel guilty about the conduct that's occurred that's kind of disproportionately impacted those of color? Because people are, I think, afraid to look at themselves because they don't want to feel that guilt, that I was part of the system that didn't allow people to advance. So how do you deal with that when you take a look at yourself?
I'm going to open that up for others too, if people want to add into the chat room. But I feel like that's what and there's actually a presentation, I believe, next week on Friday around white guilt. And the concept of white guilt that those who feel that way, like they don't want to take that time because of everything that comes with it. But I often say, look at the folks who have lived their life with inequities, who are constantly always impacted, who are constantly disproportioned, who are constantly sitting in a classroom and having racist remarks made and not feeling a part, that little bit of guilt that you feel to focus on yourself. Folks of color, folks of marginalized groups have had to do that for their whole lives.
And there was a post in the chat room from Natalie Nagthal who said that there's a great resource. There's a book called From Equity Talk to Equity Walk, Expanding Practitioner Knowledge for Racial Justice in Higher Education by McNair, Ben Simon, and Malcolm BBQ. So again, there's some resources posted in the chat room if this is something that you want to take a closer look at.
Okay. So if folks have, I know, is there anything else on there, Stephen, in the chat before I go on?
There is that Natalie Schoenfeld said that there's a workshop on white privilege on May 15th as part of the Diversity Brown Bag series, and there's a Zoom link in the chat room as well. So if you want more information on that, please join that, and that would be a good session to think about.
Okay. So Luke Wood and Dr. Luke Wood and Dr. Harris provided us this context, especially in COVID-19, that we need to ensure that all students, regardless of their identities or circumstances, can participate in a virtual space. We know and understand right now that we are all online, and that we talk about equity, but also now we're talking about digital equity and how our responses and how our practices and how we provide access to a virtual learning space is going to be a little bit different. And so really what this presentation came about was looking at the context of where our students are at now. And we know that oftentimes there are barriers that we too are facing. And so we want to give that opportunity now in the chat room to ask yourself, what barriers are you, Coastline, facing during this time that impact us from remaining equity-minded?
So if you have any comments, go ahead and put it in the chat or chime in, you can raise your hand. Be glad to take your comments on barriers that we are facing that might impact our ability to be equity minded. So Celeste says that equity is an issue to consider when working with individuals with disabilities as well. And individuals with disabilities present challenges as disabilities are not necessarily understood, visible versus invisible disabilities, and a concept of spread. So again, there are a lot of factors when you're taking a look at remaining equity minded, and lots of different groups that you have to consider. And Helen Ward, socioeconomic barriers that our students faced with a lack of access to the internet and laptops. And Cody, the mindset that I have time, our students should also have time to work on the class. And Aaron Thomas, I'm challenged by feeling helpless to address a serious challenge being faced by the students. So those are all some good thoughts. And what I get out of that is that faculty and classified professionals see themselves put in this position of having to deal with the circumstance of COVID-19. And sometimes we forget that the students' experience is much different than what we're going through, even though we have an expectation that they should be able to handle it, right? So what do we do about that, Leah? How do we face that? Where we're imposing on students our own ability to handle the situation?
Well, I think the first thing, and I don't know if folks have done this, is asking yourself this question, is because we know, like, we have to do, especially during COVID-19, is understanding that oftentimes I hear, and I do the work as far as trauma work every day in and out, is that we are all living in a trauma-induced state right now, whether we want to recognize it or we don't. We are all being impacted by COVID-19, and oftentimes not taking that time to self-reflect on your own situation and knowing and understanding that allows for us to be a lot shorter with students. Right? I often find myself towards the end of the day and I'm getting emails from students and they're asking the same questions. And I'm like, the answers are here. I've already emailed. I start getting shorter with my email responses. And that's my own stuff. But we oftentimes, those are some barriers, right? That I don't have, or I'm not allowing myself that time to do that self-care. And so that's a barrier because I'm constantly sitting at a computer all day. But a student may or may not be, and when they're coming to us, I'm putting on my own, bringing to them my own issues and being shorter with messages or not being as understanding. And so that's just my own things that I'm doing. But I find when I actually sat down and reflected on what barriers I'm facing, it allowed for me to readjust what I was doing to be more compassionate and to be more flexible, and knowing that if I'm not in the state to assist the student right now, that maybe I need to allow for somebody else to do that work, or I just take a couple minutes and takes that time to. So there are some barriers. I think someone also said in the chat room that it's easy for us to think that we're all in the same boat during this time. However, we're all different. Even as faculty and staff, all of us, our own socioeconomic status is different. Even our own access to computers and resources. And so that also is a barrier for us when we are working and assisting students, is if I don't have access to what I need, how am I going to be able to assist our students? Okay. So we wanted to put that in there so that you all take that time to reflect on your own barriers. Because I want to make it known that during COVID-19, we are all facing difficulties that we may not know. And yes, we are in the business of serving our students, but in order to best serve your students, to best be equity minded, to keep that practice, to be compassionate, to be flexible, we have to know and understand what's going on with ourselves as well. All right, so here also we want to say, so we talked, some people kind of mixed in there, but what are some of the pressures our students are facing? You can add some more in the chat too. Access to digital needs. So we know that, yes, we're providing laptops and computers. Still, students need access to internet and hotspots. And then when they get that, I have this computer, I have the internet, but lo and behold, I live in a home where there are multiple other people. So I have this resource, but yet I'm not able to really focus on the work that I need to do. We know basic needs as far as food, security, housing, and I also put in there safety. We often forget, like, students may have all of these things, but are now in a situation or in a place where they're living with a partner who may be abusive. They're living in a situation that's not safe. And so oftentimes we forget safety is also a basic need that many of our students may be facing during this time period. We've talked to students right now who are living in shelters, who are homeless, who are looking for resources and saying, like, I've told my faculty member, but they're just not understanding right now. And so what can we do about that? Also, many of our students are essential workers. So they're working. And so their hours are not the same. Their hours are during the class periods. They've made their schedule what it was supposed to be before COVID-19. And now we're in a situation where they're not able to do both, or it's getting harder for them to do the balancing act. And I think the biggest one that we often forget is access to campus. Our campus for many of our students is an escape. They're able to leave home, being able to do their work, they're able to contact you, they're able to come in and get the resources that they need, and they're not able to do that. Yes, they can get them virtually, but that we all know that that is different. We all know that if you call sometimes, I think yesterday, not to put anybody on blast, I was working with students as far as counseling, and I was on the Cranium chat and we were talking, and all of a sudden Cranium just died. It died out. So even just that access, and I was frustrated, so I can imagine if that's a student, some of the pressures that they're facing.
And there's some comments in the chat. Aaron mentions that not only are people taking care of their kids at home, or students taking care of their kids at home, some have parents now that they're having to take care of, so that exacerbates the problem, or not being able to have the quiet time to go to the library and study, or get away, from the hectic day-to-day circumstance to be a true student. And Natalie Nagthal mentions that some students may have some prior mental health issues, and those really just get exacerbated by the situation with COVID-19, the pressure and the stress. And so all of those things are affecting students and their ability to succeed.
So the next question, kind of the meat of this presentation, is what strategies can we infuse into our practice during this time to better serve our students in keeping equity in mind. So what we're going to do, and it is a question, so you can feel free to put some things in the chat, but we're also going to go through, I went to a presentation, I think about a week ago. As you can see, they do a lot of things. Dr. Harris and Dr. Wood, but around 70 equity-minded practices during COVID-19. And they had two sessions. One was geared towards faculty and one was geared towards student services. And so we brought together some of those pieces, and we are not going to go through all 7. I don't think we are. We're going to give you all 7, but I don't know time-wise if we'll have the time to go through all 7. But all of these resources for both of these are going to be up on our equity website, so you can view those, and there's links at the end of this as well.
And as we're going through, some of the things that have been put in the chat room, Leah, are patience. Some of the things that we can do, have patience, self-care. You had already mentioned, if you aren't in the right place and taking care of yourself, then it's hard to help others be in the right place. And then being empathetic, having empathy for the circumstances, that students are going through and that everybody's going through. Looking at the holistic wellness in addition to academic success, look at the whole student.
Great. So Dr. Wood talked about, and Dr. Harris talked about these 7 key things. One is to be intrusive, be flexible, compassionate, which we're going to spend some time on, being responsive, being rage conscious, which we talked about, being informed, community focused, and being clear and validating. So what we're going to spend some time for the next 20 minutes or so is going through these and providing examples of what that looks like. So this is an opportunity where Stephen is going to bring into account the work that he's been doing as a faculty member to provide that flexibility and compassion. I know there's some folks here from the Student Equity Work Group, so I would love to hear as well of what you all are doing, because we've talked about this. But this is really that time where we are having that open conversation, because what I want us to be able to walk away with is tools and practices that we can use, keeping these 7 pieces of equity, that when you're facing a situation that you can say, like, you know, I can be more flexible. I can be more responsive to really assist our students, because we don't know how long this is going to go on. But even once this is over, that these practices should be a part of your work, be a part of your everyday life. And that's what we mean by keeping equity in the center. That, you know, it's unfortunately we have to have COVID-19 to continue to have some of these conversations, but this should be the work that we are doing every day with our students to help them get to whatever goal of success they are looking for here at Coastline. That through these 7 practices, we are helping our students persist, we are retaining our students, we're providing them access to meet their goals.
And I'll just start with the flexibility and compassion. You know, I had shared with Leah a situation with a student. I had an exam that was obviously online, and it was previously a face-to-face class, but the exam was online, and the student didn't take the exam. And so I reached out to the student and said, she was a good student. You know, you missed the exam. And she was almost in tears explaining to me that typically, you know, she doesn't have great internet at home, and that she would normally go to a library somewhere or someplace to be able to get Wi-Fi. And as a result, since things are closed, she wasn't able to do that. And she felt embarrassed and frustrated and hadn't reached out and didn't know what to do. And so I just felt that in that circumstance, that was an opportunity for me to say, you know what, I'm going to reopen the exam. Are you able to go to a friend's house or some place where you can still, you know, do the social distancing or get some better Wi-Fi and take the exam? I'm going to let you do that. Whereas, you know, in a typical situation, you know, instructors might say, no, this is the deadline. This is not a typical circumstance. And so I tried to be flexible and allow her to take the exam. And she did take the exam and did well. You know, I know faculty may have some concerns about allowing those types of things, but right now we need to try to help the students succeed. And for me, that's flexibility and being compassionate.
Great. So I know there's some things in the chat, so I'll let Stephen kind of go through those. I'm just going to go through what's here on our slide. Stephen talked about allowing students to make up work. We hear this idea of, well, they have to, the rigor. I'm going to lose the rigor of the course. We have like a month left in classes, but I think I was talking to Josh earlier this week, and when we were talking about equity, and it's, students are still learning. If they're able to do the work and they're able to complete it, they are still learning. And so oftentimes if you changing your deadline or changing your due date, students are still learning. They're still able to say they're taking the test. And so especially during this time, we can provide some flexibility. For a lot of our folks, student services who are on those front lines, monitoring our tone with email responses and with phone calls. We often know like there's a lot going on, whether it's in your own home or you've just been on so many, what we call Zoom exhaustion or phone call exhaustion, one-on-one exhaustion. But students and individuals pick up on your phone responses and how you respond. I mean, essentially, so being compassionate and just being aware of that. I think this is something that we've already done at Coastline, is providing refunds and not asking, like not having students fill out another form, but just providing them, because we know like you're not here parking, you're not using this resource. So providing those resources, looking at your policies to say like, are these helpful during this time period? So looking at policies as far as office hours, I know many of us have strict still 9 to 5 kind of ability to work with students, but can we provide some flexibility? Because we know and understand that if there are people who have kids at home, they may not be able to do work or get the assistance that they need until after 5. So I'm gonna give a shout out, right? I know Cody's on the line, but I've had students who needed some assistance and they called me at 5. I'm like, oh wow, you're calling at 5, you need help with Canvas. One, I have no idea about Canvas, but 2, who can I contact, because it is after 5 o'clock and the 24-hour hotline is not getting the student what they need. And so looking at the flexibility, and so Cody, it was after 5 and he was still able to assist that student and took that time to do so. But that's also look at our policies and things that we have in place, is how can we be flexible, especially during this time, knowing what we know about the situation, to help students outside of those hours? Do we have individuals even in our own offices who would like to work later or switch their shifts to be able to assist our students? So I know there's some other things in the chat, so I'll let, we'll go through those too.
Yeah, so Erin talked about, that all of her assignments are open for an extra week for late submission, no penalty. And again, that validate students and their ability to complete the work and make them feel like, okay, even though this is a little bit more of a struggle for me, I can get it done and I'm not being penalized for the extra effort it's taking me to get it done. She's making it clear over and over that extensions will be granted with no penalties. And again, that is just the flexibility and compassion that I think validate students and the work they're doing in the classroom. And then there's some definite shout outs to Cody and everybody, who deals with Cody gets the feeling he's compassionate and is flexible and willing to do what's necessary to help people succeed. And the tone, all of that, the phone call, the discussion is empathy based. And so I want to give him a shout out as well for everything that he's been doing. And the managers, Cody's shouting out to the managers to allow him to have a flexible schedule. That's true, very true. It's sometimes we get stuck in, no, this is the schedule, here's the rules, here are the policies, but allowing someone to have a flexible schedule to better serve students is certainly equity minded for sure.
And so we also want in the situation for us to be intrusive. So for our faculty, we often, when you're setting up your courses at the beginning of the courses, you're asking, hopefully you're trying to engage that student. You're talking a little bit about who you are, to kind of break down those walls and barriers so that they're able to see that you're human and they want to engage. But in this situation, we want you to be intrusive. And I think oftentimes we're a little far off. We may not ask as many questions. We may not reach out or check in with our students. But especially in COVID-19, we need to do that. We need to be thinking 2-3 steps ahead in front of our students, because especially we know for a lot of our DI groups, whether it's our LGBTQ groups, our veterans, they're not going to reach out for help, or they may not reach out for help. And so we have to be the ones to take that first step. So faculty, when you're starting your courses, inquiring from students is, how are you taking this course? And I say how you're taking this course is, are you taking it on a computer? Are you taking it on your phone? Because by you getting that information, you can then be intrusive and provide other resources. So if you hear a student like, I only have my phone, that's how I'm taking, oh, did you know that we have this resource where you can loan out a computer? Or, asking, is this their first online course? Because that's also going to help you and how you work through your classes and how you show compassion, how you show flexibility to know and understand that they're probably not going to get it right the first time. They may need other resources on how to work a discussion board. And so really taking that time to get in there, and what I say is be nosy. In the Emoja program, we talk about being in everybody's business. And that's one of the topics is, especially right now, being equity focused, it's everyone's business. We're all in this together. And so we have to do that. And so using Civitas and Dolphin Alert or Starfish to utilize data to see who's coming to your classes, who's being engaged with your classes, who's not. Do we need to do actual outreach to those students? Who hasn't checked in? We're in week, like, I guess like 6 post-COVID. Who has just dropped off? And what do they need? And so really working with our students to be intrusive. I also saw on one of our sessions that someone said to record sessions or classroom sessions so students can go back and review their course, like review the information. Oftentimes students may be in the classroom setting if you're doing it via Zoom, but they also may have a lot of other things going on. Their child may be playing a part. They may actually be doing, I had a student the other day, it's like, yeah, I was in class, but I also was at work. So they were literally doing their class while they were at work. And so recording that session allows for that student to go back later on. And that, I mean, I don't think that that's much for us to do, but being able just to provide our services how we are, but also just thinking ahead for the needs of our student.
And Leah, I think part of that too, you know, for faculty, and I'm sure for classified professionals, just asking the student, how are you doing? Right? Everything going okay? And allow them to, you know, give feedback or provide the struggles that they're going through so that they have somebody who's listening to what their circumstances are. I just think that that ear and the opportunity for them to express their concerns or difficulties is important to relieve some of the pressure that they might be feeling.
Yeah. And I say often when we say reach out and check in on our students, in student services, there was a survey that was sent out. And so often we send emails, and I do emails, but I also realize a lot of students won't follow up with an email. So we've doing calls. Because with that being intrusive, you're able to hear the tone, you're able to hear the worries the student may have, you're able to kind of hear what also may be going on. So being intrusive may look like an email. And I think I saw Erin Thomas in there said like she reached out to a student and she kind of went over above and beyond and to reach out with their private email to say, you know, how can I assist you? And found out there were some other issues and things that were going on to support the students. So it definitely being intrusive during this time, as Erin said, it may feel like you're kind of you're overstepping or you're getting too personal. But I will tell you in this short period of COVID-19 and just in my work, especially around Title IX and working with our students of color through Emoja, that a lot of students need that. That is the push that they need. That's the motivation. That's the care that they want to know that Coastline's got them through this situation, that they're not in this by themselves. And so we want to push for that as well. So there are some fears regarding flexibility that we've heard from faculty in the past, and so we want to put that out there, that there are some concerns over the rigor of the course. Students may be taken advantage, academic integrity, technical capabilities of students in regards to the flexibility. And so I'll let Stephen kind of, this is more the faculty side, that there is this, well, if I do this, is it really going to help the student?
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I've heard and talked to faculty members that, you know, might be expressing concern. Well, if I give them the extra time, is that impacting the rigor of my course? Well, no, it's being equity minded, and they're still learning the material. You're still able to determine whether they have an understanding of the material by giving them extra time and propping those up who need the support and the help is not impacting the rigor of the course. You're not watering down the course in any way. So I think that faculty need to overcome that concern and step back and say, you know, if I'm hardlined and I draw the line on exams or work, you're really disproportionately impacting those that need the most help. And instead, you should be going the other way and trying to prop them up. And it will not affect your rigor. Students taking advantage, I haven't seen that in any of my students. That's not something that I've noticed, that they're taking advantage of maybe extra time. I know Aaron talked about it. I just don't think that that's the mindset of students, and they're really just trying to make it through. Increased workload, yeah, it might be a little bit more work if you're not able to set a deadline and have all the work turned in on a specific time. But you have to do what needs to be done to help the student succeed. And if you don't allow that because maybe it's going to take you a little bit more time to grade something, you're really not being equity minded. That's part of the process. And there are things that you can do as a faculty member to stay up on the work and follow up with those things that maybe are turned in later and not by a specific deadline. Accountability kind of goes hand in hand with students taking advantage. You can still make students accountable. You can still use proctorial or other methods to make sure that the exams are secure. There's lots of things that can be done to keep the accountability of the coursework. And then the technical capabilities of students. That is a huge concern with faculty members, and you need to be thinking of that and don't just ignore it. Some students may not have the capability to do these things online or via Zoom, especially maybe our ESL students or students with disabilities. And you really have to be mindful of that and not think, well, they can't do it, they're not going to succeed. You have to reach out to them and do whatever you can to assist them in being successful. And then to have something in the chat that A&R reach out to all the students that are dropped by the instructors to encourage them to submit an excused withdrawal for refunds, and that the past grade options extended to May 8th. And then Helen Ward says that sharing with students the flexibility of transferring by the CSUs and UC and the private schools. There's admission changes, deposit deferments, all of that's occurring during the COVID-19.
Great. So the next two are to be responsive, clear, and validate. I think that those are all pretty self-explanatory. However, we know and understand that oftentimes we have lots of emails and we have lots of things going on, but our students need us to respond. And so if you are going to have discussion boards up for faculty, that you are active on those, that you're following up with questions and concerns. I know there are many times students will email, we'll start a situation, and then we'll say, we'll get back to you. I need to find out from financial aid. So making sure that we are doing those things, that we are not leaving our students behind, that we're clear in our communication, that we also are overly communicating to our students. I've had many students there's situations right now, they're just confused. And so if we are confused about our processes, if we're confused about our policies, our students are also going to be confused. So we need to make sure throughout our work that we are just being clear, that we validate situations, that we are being responsive to students who do reach out and that do check in. We talked about this already, and so I just put this in here for us to kind of go over, because at the heart of equity is making sure that we are race conscious. And so we talked about this earlier, is that understanding the systematic structures that are in place may be hindering a student's success, allowing students to see themselves in the curriculum. And this is something that we should be doing above and beyond COVID-19. This should be something that we can take a look at your syllabi to say, who's in here? When you're having students maybe look at videos or presentations or webinars, who's included in those? We also want, there's a presentation that we went to webinar this past week in regards to microaggressions. And one of the things that they talked about, especially during COVID-19, when everything is happening, that's often a time where our own biases creep in, that our own biases take effect because we are also overwhelmed and going through our own situations, that those come up, that you may be talking to a student on the phone, who may have English as their second language, and you start talking a lot louder. That's not going to help the situation. That's not going to assist them in speaking and you understanding them. And so being aware of some of our own biases and avoiding those microaggressions. And then if those things do occur, that you own up to it, that you respond to that situation. And so there's there's some great techniques. And so that's also posted on our equity webpage too, on ways to, be aware that microaggressions, especially during COVID-19, are happening, that they are coming up, and in our classroom settings that they may be occurring, and how as faculty members and also how student services, if we're having issues that are coming up in group settings, in our community Zoom meetings, that we are bringing attention to those situations, that we are stepping in. And through all of this, you all are doing this already, is going to trainings and webinars to educate yourself on best practices during COVID-19 and beyond. And one of the big pieces, I think, is being inclusive in our language. And I think it even more so now where everyone's online and you're not necessarily able to see who's online, who is in your classes. Maybe your Zoom's off, maybe you're just not able to see, but being inclusive in a language, especially around our LGBTQ students, so allowing for folks to choose their preferred names, using inclusive pronouns, and the work that we're doing, because all of that plays a part into students feeling like this is a community, feeling that there is care from their faculty and staff, and that flexibility piece there. Were there anything in the chat for those ones? So we're kind of coming towards the end of this, but when it comes to student equity and when it comes to equitable practice, we often hear, well, if I have to do this for one group, am I making it easier for the next group? If I have to do this for my students of color, then am I have to do this for everybody? And the idea, especially around especially in the classroom, is if I do this, if I make this adjustment, if I change the pedagogy of my class, if I start doing small group work, because we know that that might help some of our groups, as opposed to saying, hey, we're just going to do test for the entire part of COVID-19, but instead, that may not be working, right? Taking tests during this time may not be working, but having small group discussions and doing smaller coursework activities that have more points might be more beneficial. That we often combat that with, well, that's just not fair. Students aren't going to learn. But I always bring up the idea of the curb cut effect, and you can see it here. And so it was a law and program designed to benefit vulnerable groups such as disabled or people of color in Florida. But what they noticed is, probably all of us use it, it's designed to help folks in wheelchairs, to assist them with the curb, as you can see there, the example. But we know and understand that even people now with children who maybe can't using a baby stroller, if you're just riding your bike or you're using your skates, that they are also using the walkway. They're also using the curb cut. And so, yes, you may change your curriculum to help one group, but also know and understand that you're helping numerous other students around you. So yes, you may have to go out of your way to reach out to students and to be intrusive. Yes, you may be flexible with your assignments, but you're not just helping one group of individuals, you're also helping a lot of other folks. And so oftentimes we hear, well, I can't do that, I don't want to do that because it's only going to affect one group and it's going to be unfair to others. But oftentimes everyone in that classroom, everyone in that environment is also going to succeed and find the benefit as well.
And then Celeste typed in, Aaron says that helps with parents with strollers, obviously, maybe not necessarily the intended audience of the curb cut, but they are helped out with that. And then Celeste mentions that they have individuals with disabilities to thank for many forms of access. Text was initially created for hearing impaired as a means of communication. So some of the innovations that we have actually come from trying to help those who are disabled or have limited access.
And so we are going to open it up too at this time for questions that folks may have, but we want you to know like how you all individually can support or keeping in mind those 7 practices, providing accommodations, being flexible, being aware of the resources that are available for students, seeking assistance. If you're not sure, if you don't know, it's okay to say that and name that and reach out. Ending conversations in your classroom and stepping into situations that may be victim blaming or have microaggressions in your classrooms or programs, they do come up, and call out those things. But I think one of the most important things through all of this throughout COVID is also that we are doing our own self-reflection, that we're taking that time to recognize kind of our own individual, our own biases and how those might play in to us being flexible. But I would ask that all of you take a look at your practices, whether that's a policy that you have, and you're like, oh, is that really helping our students right now? Could we do something to shift that? That's going to provide better resources for our students. Take a look at your office hours to say, you know what? We're not getting calls during this time period, but we realize when we come to work on, the next day we have 20 or so calls from 5 to 6. Can we stay open that extra hour to assist those students? So really taking a look at the practices that we had in play before COVID-19 that may have worked, that may have done us justice, but we are now in a different time. And so spending some time with your supervisors, your faculty to say, like, what improvements can we make, keeping equity in the center and being aware of those 7-minded principles. So I also, right now we'll take questions, but at this time I'm also going to see if I can switch over because I want you all to be aware of, Stephen, I'll let you do questions while I find this.
Okay. Dr. Adrian, great presentation. Appreciate the robust discussion. Great job, everyone. And we do appreciate, thank you, Dr. Adrian, for being supportive of the students and the faculty and classified professionals and all of the administration and doing everything that they can do to make it easier for everybody during this difficult time. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming, attending this. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and be glad to try and answer them. But Leah's got the resources from the student equity page up, and that's a great place to go for you to get resources that you might need or students might need.
Yeah, so I just want folks to be aware, if you just go to Title IX, or not Title IX, sorry, it's my other position. If you just go to student equity, to the Coastline website, we've updated, thanks to Juan, thanks to marketing, to have additional resources up for our students so that we have things all in one place. So there's also resources for you as faculty and staff around equitable teaching. There's various workshops and webinars. And so we just wanted to make sure that everything was in one place for folks to know about. So especially during this time, one of those things we want you to do is continue to do that work for yourself. So that information is there. It's also a place where you can go send students for additional resources, as well as the student services page.
Okay. Doesn't look like we have any questions, so we'll just kind of keep it open if anybody does have anything. But again, thank you very much for attending. Thank you, Leah, for the outstanding presentation and all the information. And again, please reach out to Leah and the Student Equity department so that you can get any information you need to help students. And have a great Friday and enjoy the barbecue.
I think we're on a
hat, by the way, Stephen.
I'm sorry, Dr. Adrian.
I love your hat.
Oh, thank you very much. This is my sit in the lake hat, so it's a little bit waterlogged, but we had to dress up for the occasion since we're having a barbecue.
Good job. Good job.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Leah, is that literally a hat on your head or is that like an emoji? Oh, it is. I was wondering, I couldn't tell.
Yeah,
I had to ask.
it's a taco.
Oh, you know what? It's because you're sharing the screen. You're so small. I was like, I can't tell what it is. It almost looks like a crown sort of like tilted sideways, you know?
Yeah, it's a taco. I'm not a big fan of barbecue, so yeah, but I love tacos.
There you go.
That's awesome. Gotta love it.
All right,
Yeah.
thank
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.
you.